Hi there. It's great to be here this morning. Those of you who know me know that I start with an apology, which is that I have absolutely no PowerPoint slides with me today. I know there are some of you who will be deeply disappointed, and I won't take offense if you go out and grab a coffee while I share some thoughts with you. Today, I want to share some thoughts and questions about a topic area that I've only recently started to explore. So I think I have some important questions. I'm not sure I have all that many answers at this point, but it's a great opportunity to at least put into words some of the thoughts and research that I've been doing and get some feedback, hopefully some in this session itself, but hopefully even more over time as we establish a conversation around the topic. So to introduce the topic, I want to start on a down note, which is that we live in a world of mounting performance pressure. And it's even worse than that, because if there were pressure that were predictable and we knew how and where it was going to manifest itself, that would be something we could plan for. But what's really interesting about the current global economy is that the events are extreme and unpredictable, what Taleb calls the black swans, occurring with increasing frequency and increasing severity. They come out of left field in the blink of an eye and upset all our carefully laid out plans, and in some cases even kill us in the process. So this is really pressure. And we feel it at all levels. Personal, institutional, the institutions we work with are feeling pressure, mounting pressure over time, and social pressure. So it's mounting at all levels. And the bad news, the really bad news, is it's not going to go away. The research that we've done at the center around what we call the big shift suggests that this is a long-term secular shift and that there's absolutely no sign of it leveling off, much less turning around. So it's something we need to prepare for and find ways, hopefully, to thrive in. Otherwise, we're just going to stress out, drop out, and become more and more marginalized. It is the dark side of digital technology, because I do believe that digital technology is, in fact, a key driver of this mounting pressure, reducing barriers to entry and barriers to movement and connecting us in ways that set off cascades that are completely unpredictable and scale at unimaginable rates. So I think it's understandable that we're all feeling increasing stress, growing stress. It's not in our minds, it's not in our imagination, it's real. That pressure is out there. And it's also predictable that in a time of mounting pressure, certain cognitive biases take hold, which we have got to at least be aware of as we move forward. One is that we tend to magnify risk. In times of mounting pressure, we magnify the perception of risk, and we discount the perception of reward. It tends to make us more tentative, more risk-averse. We want to wait till things clear up. Time horizons shrink. We tend to focus on shorter and shorter term horizons. Long term is something we can't even possibly think about because it's so far away. What's happening now is overwhelming us. So it's a short-term horizon. Another cognitive bias is we tend to fall into zero-sum mindsets, win-lose mindset. If all we have is the short term, we have a fixed set of resources. So the only question is, who's going to get what share of those resources? If you win, I lose. Talk about erosion of trust. Win-lose mindsets definitely erode trust. Sound familiar? I think our society and many of our institutions and many of us as individuals fall prey to these cognitive biases. They're playing out around us every day. But it doesn't have to be that way. There is an alternative future out there. As we all know, digital technology opens up incredible potential, unlimited exponential possibility, in fact. It enables us to connect, collaborate, and learn at a scale that was unimaginable in the past. In fact, if properly harnessed, can unleash increasing returns that amplify our impact. At the end of the day, if we get this right, the best way to think about the world is not 7 billion mouths to feed, but 7 billion minds to unleash. That's a powerful, powerful opportunity. What do we need to shift to those kinds of positive outcomes rather than the dystopian future that the cognitive biases are inexorably driving us towards? Well, I think there are a lot of things that have to come together. But I'm increasingly of the belief that one of the most powerful ones is to expand our focus beyond stories to narratives. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to make a distinction that I think is important, and I look to you to help me to filter it and refine it over time. Stories are incredibly popular as a topic right now. I counted here at South by Southwest, there are 112 sessions with storytelling or stories as part of the topic. So it's of huge interest, and it's understandable why there's interest. But I think stories, at least the way I'm going to define it, and we can challenge the semantics, but at least bear with me in terms of the distinction I want to make. For me, stories are defined by two attributes. One is they're finite. They have a beginning, they have a middle, and they have an end, or a resolution. And the second aspect of stories that's interesting is they're stories about me, or those other people over there. They're not about you. You're meant to hear the story, hear the experiences. Now, stories are extremely powerful in terms of engaging emotion and creating memorable experiences. So I understand why stories are so intriguing and why there's so much focus on the power of story. But I want to draw a distinction between stories, as I just defined them, and narratives. And I know sometimes we use interchangeably, but again, bear with me, I'm going to make a distinction, which is that narratives have two other attributes. One is narratives are open-ended. They don't have resolution. There is something that is in the process of unfolding. The end is yet to be determined. And second, there's an invitation to all of us to participate in that narrative, to help determine what the outcome is going to be. It's yet to be determined, and it's up to you. Not up to them, not up to me, up to you as to how this is going to unfold and resolve itself. So I don't know, does this distinction make sense? I invite conversation about it. But whether we choose those words or other words, and again, it can all be semantics, I think there is an important distinction between those two kinds of ways of communicating. Ultimately, in my mind, I would also say that, again, stories are very powerful, but I contrast with narratives. The power of narratives is many people throughout history have actually given their lives for a narrative. Narratives not only motivate action, they motivate life and death choices. So there's a power there that very few, if any, stories can replicate. Now, narratives, at least again the way I'm thinking about it, answers three questions. One question is, why are we here? Second, what can we accomplish while we're here? And then third, how should we connect with each other in a way to accomplish the things that we're here for? Those are three really important questions, and any good, powerful narrative ultimately answers all three. And stories can arise, narratives can arise at three different levels. Personal narrative, institutional narrative, and a social narrative. Now, at the level of social narrative, you don't have to look very far for some very compelling narratives that have shaped our history. There's the narrative of Christianity. Man was born into sin, but there's a Savior that can help take us into salvation, us. And it's up to you. It hasn't been determined yet. The future is yours to determine. There's the American narrative. America, the land of opportunity, a place where anybody, anywhere, no matter what their circumstances, can come and become something much greater than they were before. Huge, powerful magnet, drawing people from all over the world. Now, by the way, I didn't say narratives have to be true. That narrative conveniently ignores the American Indians who were here before, and a lot of African Americans who came here not of their own will. And yet it was a powerful narrative. It motivated incredible action over time. There's the Marxist narrative. Workers are in chains, and they have the opportunity to throw off those chains and create a society where, from each according to his ability and to each according to his needs. An incredible vision, motivated incredible action. Future yet to be determined. It's up to us, not up to them, not up to some force, up to you, up to us, as to how we make that happen, and whether it happens. There are institutional narratives. And I'll give just one example here, which I think is interesting. It's been condensed to a slogan, and I think I worry about confusing the slogan with the narrative, but it was Apple, is Apple. Condensed into the slogan of think different. Very powerful imperative, think different. And it captured a much broader narrative, which was technologies creating the potential and even the imperative for all of us to break out of the uniformity and conformity that mass society forces us into and achieve much greater impact by expressing our unique individuality. But it's up to us. It hasn't been determined. Think different. And important to note, and this is a confusion I get with a lot of executives that I deal with when they talk about narrative. It's a narrative about our company and what we're trying to achieve and what kinds of things we've done, what great products we've introduced, and how innovative we are. The narrative of Think Different is not about Apple. It's about us. It just so happens that Apple is there as a catalyst. But it's about us. So I think it's an important illustration of narrative. I'll also just note in passing that I think narratives have played a powerful role in history at the level of cities or regions that have had global impact at certain points in time. I think there was a distinctive narrative that led to the rise of Athens in the Greek era, a narrative that led to the rise of Florence in the Renaissance, Edinburgh in the Enlightenment, Vienna in the early modernist period, and then most recently Silicon Valley in the technology era. The Silicon Valley narrative, we can change the world and make it a better place by working together, collaborating, to harness that exponential power of this awesome digital technology. An incredible narrative. it drew people from all over the world, again, to Silicon Valley. It created something that has sustained itself for quite a period of time. Now, I'm going to continue to unpack this a little bit, and I want to make a further distinction because I think there are two different kinds of narratives. There's one kind of narrative which is an opportunity-based narrative. The driving force is around an opportunity that's out there for us to harness, to capture, to enjoy. There's a different kind of narrative which is a threat-based narrative. The motivation is we are under threat. We're under attack. We have to come together. The future is yet to be determined, but it's all about that threat. And are we going to respond in time and in the right way to deal with that threat? Now, I'd like to just suggest that one of the reasons we have such a dysfunctional political society in America today, and you may disagree with that assessment, but that's my assessment, is because on both sides of the aisle, we have fallen back to threat-based narratives. If you're a Republican, the threat is all about those terrorists out there who are coming to get us. And if it's not those terrorists out there, it's those secularists here at home who are here to undermine all our family values that we hold so precious. We're under threat, we're under attack. If you're a Democrat, it's a different set of threats. The threats is those polluters that are destroying our environment. We're facing environmental catastrophe. The world is collapsing around us. And those evil people on Wall Street, threatening all our jobs, all our job security, creating increasing income inequality. This is a huge threat to our society. We need to mobilize. But both sides, threat, threat, threat. Where's the opportunity? Where's the opportunity-based narratives? The reason I put such an emphasis on opportunity-based narratives versus threat-based narratives is I think that opportunity-based narratives help us to overcome those cognitive biases that I mentioned earlier in terms of mounting pressure. If you have a compelling opportunity-based narrative, first of all, you tend to magnify the perception of reward. There's a huge, exciting reward out there. And yeah, there are some risks along the way, but it's worth it. That reward is so amazing. And because that reward is so awesome, it's going to take some time to achieve it. But it's worth it. Focus on the horizon. Focus on the opportunity. It's coming. And it tends to cultivate a positive sum mindset. It is about us coming together and creating something much greater than we could on our own, individually. If we collaborate, we have much more to share together. Very different mindset than that zero sum. It's a fixed set of resources. You get it or I get it, but that's the only way it can happen. Now, I mentioned narratives can and do tend to emerge at different levels, at various levels. And I've come to believe through personal experience that personal narratives are central to who we are and how we act. I talked earlier about mounting pressure in our society. I just want to tell you a personal story about mounting pressure, which is my childhood. I came under extreme pressure. I had emotionally abusive and absent parents. And it was combined with an experience of moving to a different country every year of my childhood. So when we tend to have dysfunctional, abusive, nuclear families, one of our compensation mechanisms is to reach out to extended family or friends that can sustain me through that experience. I faced the challenge of going into a new school every year in the knowledge that at the end of the year, I was going to have to give up all the friends that I had. So, mounting pressure. I lived it. I lived in fear, and I felt extremely isolated. But I survived by evolving a personal narrative. The narrative that I developed, and I would never have articulated it in these words when I was a young kid, but in reflection, I think I can capture it, which is, I am here to serve you by developing the potential of my mind and sharing my ideas through writing. That was my narrative. That's why I was here. That's the kind of impact I could have. And the personal narrative did some really interesting things for me. One was, it allowed me to escape emotions. Emotions were very scary things as a child, because I was confronted with negative emotions all the time. I could escape into the world of the mind, reason, avoid those emotions. I could hopefully, although not to be achieved, win the love of my parents, because both of my parents respected the intellect and the academic achievement. So it was a personal narrative that fit very nicely into what I hoped would win their love and connection. And by focusing on helping others, it was all about helping others, I could avoid sharing any of my own vulnerability. I'd be the strong one, the reliable one, the dependable one. I wouldn't ever have to be vulnerable. And I could use writing as a way to reduce face-to-face interaction. I didn't have to connect face-to-face with anybody. I could sit alone, write, send it out, and still connect with others, but through writing rather than face-to-face, because face-to-face was so scary as a child. Now, it's interesting to me in reflection that the narrative that I evolved to survive, and in some respects thrive during that very difficult childhood, was an opportunity-based narrative. It could have been a threat-based narrative, but I ended up evolving an opportunity one. There was opportunity out there to help others through writing, through the mind. And it kept me going, motivated me. But over time, I've evolved a new narrative. I've realized over time that this narrative that had helped me so much as a child was limiting my potential for growth and development. So over time, I've begun evolving a new narrative. I don't think it's quite there yet, but it takes the form of, I need your help in framing and answering really exciting questions that could unlock potential and possibility for everyone. Really energizing. It helps me to overcome a lot of my deep introversion and shyness and connect with others in a rich and nourishing way, and build a very rich network of relationships, personal relationships, that stimulate and support me over time. This new personal narrative helps me to express vulnerability. I need help. It's not about me helping you. I need help. I don't have the answers. Something that I viewed previously as very dangerous and something that should be avoided at all costs, vulnerability. But by expressing vulnerability, I find it helps me build trust and build deeper, more satisfying relationships with people. It gives me a foundation to express emotions. In an environment of trust, I'm more able and willing to share and express emotions. It helps me to journey beyond my comfort zone to lots of different kinds of edges. Where all the interesting questions are, they're out on the edge. They're not in the core. The edges are the exciting places. And you don't need to have all the answers. All you got to do is have the questions. That's where the excitement is the questions. So, at a very personal level, I think narrative has played a very significant role in shaping my life experiences, and it's, again, one of the factors that's driven me to pay more attention to narrative at many different levels in many different contexts. But I want to pull back to this question of, so why are narratives so important? I talked earlier about this notion of overcoming these cognitive biases that can become very dysfunctional in our institutions and society. and they help to change behavior, you're more likely to act boldly and take risks with an opportunity-based narrative. You're more likely to invest for the long term rather than just focus on short-term returns. And you're much more likely to work collaboratively for shared goals. I think narratives also play another role, which is very important, and stories don't quite do it, at least again the way I'm defining them, is that they provide a form of stability in an arena of increasing instability. Narratives are something you can hold on to, that typically aren't going to change, or at least change very radically and very unexpectedly. They're a compass that we all need and crave in a time of growing uncertainty and extreme events. Narratives also play an important role in focusing on what's important. In a time when we're overwhelmed with sensory inputs and impact, what's really important? What's a filter that can help us to figure out where to spend our time, where to devote our attention? Help us to cope with that attention overload that we're all suffering with. And in that context, I want to make another distinction, because I think there's an interesting distinction between what I call the narrative of the true believer versus the narrative of the explorer. So the narrative of the true believer, and this is, I think, oversimplification, but characteristic of a lot of religious narratives, is there is a destination out there. It's very specific. We can describe it in great detail. And there's a very specific path that we need to go along to get to that destination. You have to believe. You have to accept this is the path and that's the destination. Narrative of the explorer is very different. There's an area of opportunity out there. Not quite sure where and how it's going to manifest and evolve, but it's a huge opportunity. And in very broad form, we can describe some of the elements of it, but it's up to us through our actions and all the actions that are going to be hard to predict in terms of how and where they come together, but to manifest that opportunity. Very different kind of narrative from the narrative of the true believer. I personally believe that one of the key elements in a rapidly changing environment is the openness that is created by the narrative of the explorer. That willingness to embrace diversity, celebrate it, and highlight the value of collaboration in unexpected ways through this challenging time. Narratives are also important because it touches on another topic that I've spent an increasing amount of time on, which is they catalyze, nurture, and amplify passion. And here specifically I'm talking about the passion of the explorer, what I call the passion of the explorer, which is all about a sustained commitment to a particular domain and to making an increasing difference in that domain. It's not just I want to study it, I'm curious about it, I want to learn about it. I need to learn in order to make a difference. But the measure of success is, have I made a difference and am I increasing my impact over time? That's the passion of the explorer. And it has two different components to it, which again I think narratives tend to reinforce. One is what I call a questing disposition, which is what is your reaction and natural orientation when confronted with an unexpected challenge? Many of us who are not passionate about what we're doing treat those unexpected challenges as a horrible nuisance. Our first reaction is to try to ignore them, hope they go away. If they don't go away, we try to paper them over and hide them. If that doesn't work, we'll kludge our way through, but our key goal is to get back to our assigned work, our assigned task. A questing disposition has a completely different reaction. Wow, that's interesting. I never saw that challenge before. How would I tackle that? How would I do that? This is exciting. This is an opportunity to get myself to the next level. Very different kind of orientation. And narratives, opportunity-based narratives, I think, cultivate and amplify that kind of questing disposition. Because the quest makes sense in this broader opportunity horizon. And then you also have the notion of a connecting disposition for the passionate explorer, which is a natural orientation to connect others when confronted with challenges and opportunities that you're wrestling with. Who else can I find that will help me to address this challenge, that shares my passion or at least has some experience or expertise that might be helpful to me in terms of addressing that challenge? And we found through some of our research that passionate people, passionate workers in particular, tend to be twice as connected as workers who are not passionate about their jobs. Narratives also invite us to take initiative. They encourage leadership, not followership. And here I'm talking particularly about opportunity-based narratives. All about what can you do to help? What's going to be your role? It's up to you. Take initiative. Don't wait for instructions, orders, plans. Take initiative. And because they're open-ended, they stimulate our imagination. The future is yet to be determined. We don't know all the details. It's inviting us to imagine new possibilities. For those of us who believe imagination is increasingly critical to success, that's a powerful attribute. So in a business context, there's significant competitive advantage if you can harness the power of narrative. You get extraordinary leverage because now you're not just motivating the people in your own organization, you're motivating a much larger arena to support initiatives and to take initiative in those areas. And they motivate people to continually drive beyond their current limits. Rather than feeling stress, they feel excitement because there's such an opportunity out there and they're part of that. They're part of going to make that happen. Very powerful. And then finally, when I talk about the power of narrative, I think that narrative can be very powerful at any of those three levels: individual, institutional, and social. But I'd like to make the case that the power of narrative amplifies dramatically if you can get alignment between individual, institutional, and social narratives. Because then you're building on each other as opposed to just taking a slice and trying to get impact from that slice. Okay, so that's at least some of my beliefs in terms of the power of narrative. I guess the question is, what can we do about narrative? If they're so powerful, what do we do? And this is where I'm particularly hazy at this point, so I invite lots of contribution on this front. You know, I'll start by saying that I think the first thing we all ought to do is make our existing narratives explicit. You know, many of us will say, well, I don't have a narrative. I've never even thought about it in those terms. What's a narrative? I guarantee we all have narratives at a personal level, at an institutional level, and at a social level. They are manifested through action. If they're not explicit, they are implicit, deeply embedded in the actions we've taken, the decisions we've made, the choices we've made. And your first opportunity is to make that narrative explicit. What is that narrative underlying all those actions that have been taken? And explore this at the multiple levels. Start with your own self. What's my narrative? Whatever institution you're affiliated with, what's the institutional narrative of the group I'm associated with? And then more broadly, at various levels of society, what are the narratives there? And then, once you have that narrative framed, ask yourself whether these narratives are helping you to turn pressure into excitement and opportunity, or are they reinforcing stress and limiting the scope of your potential impact? Is this a worthwhile narrative, or isn't it? Is it helping you to achieve, and your institution, society to achieve what it can and should achieve? And then finally, what are some alternative narratives that might amplify potential and possibility? Now, the really hard question is, how do we evolve narratives? Let's say we've gone through this exercise and we found that we've got a set of narratives that when we look at them, we say, gee, I'm not really sure that's the kind of narrative I want to be associated with. Well, how do you create or move to a new narrative? And this is, I think, the most challenging aspect of this. There are some things that I do know, at least I think I know, subject to challenge. And one thing is that narratives can't be handed over to a PR firm or just written up. You can't sit down and write a narrative. In fact, when I look at all the powerful narratives throughout history, none of them had a single author that just sat down and wrote a narrative. They were a collective, collaborative effort that emerged over time by multiple authors and actors. They emerge and evolve out of cumulative action, not words, not writing things down, but actions that accumulate over time, not one or two actions that kind of illustrate the narrative. It's cumulative, day in, day out. And I go back to the example of Apple and the Think Different narrative. I mean, yes, somebody finally came up with that slogan, Think Different. But that was just a slogan. It wasn't the narrative. The narrative emerged from the first day that Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs met each other. Talk about two people who thought different and acted different from day one. And through every action they took, demonstrated difference. And then invited and motivated a whole bunch of other people outside of Apple to think differently. That's what created the narrative. So the difficult part is this isn't easy. You can't just write it. It comes through action and cumulative action over time. So, again, I'm not going to have a lot of silver bullets here, but I do think it's important to understand that these narratives emerge out of and are shaped by and sustained by daily practice. So being reflective about the daily practice that we have, and to what extent it's either supporting or undermining narratives, I think is important. You have to live it, you have to embody it. It's not just, again, those PR actions that get coverage, photo opportunities that build the narrative. No. It's those actions when the photographers aren't there. When you're in your privacy of your day-to-day life, day-to-day work environment. What are the actions there? I think part of it has to do with zooming in and zooming out. I think this is something that I've seen with all the successful entrepreneurs I know, which is the ability to think and act on two different horizons simultaneously. One is a very long-term horizon, and have some kind of view and ability to articulate that long-term, compelling, and energizing opportunity. And to be clear about how that opportunity is an opportunity for many people. Not just you, not just for your company, but for a lot of people. What's that opportunity? What is it? And then identifying near-term actions that can help make material movement towards that opportunity and demonstrate the power of the opportunity. Part of it's inspiring others to take initiative. Opening up the invitation, not just to join, but to take initiative, to define our own space around this opportunity. And celebrating the contributions and initiative of others. I think one of the powerful things in emerging narratives is the ability to find and curate stories of others who are maybe not consciously participating in these narratives, but which had impact consistent with and complementary to the narrative. Find those, celebrate them, share them. But always focus on the next wave of opportunity. Whatever the accomplishment, whatever the achievement, it's only one step along the path. There's so much more to be achieved. And I think in the context of South by Southwest, one of the things that really excites me is the fact that technology is now available that can help amplify narratives over time. Technology platforms that can help us to amplify reach and richness, allow us to spread, to actually take action and spread word about action in ways that were just not feasible in the past, that took much longer and much more effort to accomplish. And in this context, I'll also just highlight the importance, from my experience, of transmedia platforms. Now, I think many of us at South by Southwest tend to celebrate transmedia as some very new phenomenon. Wow, isn't this amazing what we can do now with technology? Well, I go back and draw some inspiration from the great narratives of the past, and I would say that one thing that defines many, if not all of them, is that their penetration of society ultimately depended on the ability to transcend the confines of any individual medium. And I'll give as my case example one of the narratives that I've talked about already, Christianity. Yeah, Christians have their Bible as a core text, and it's a central aspect of the narrative. But if that's all they had, wow, what a weak and paltry narrative that would have been. They quickly moved into sermons, music, theater, video, to evangelize that message in every medium possible. They were the pioneers of transmedia. It wasn't until South by Southwest that we had transmedia. If you look at the most successful evangelical preachers today, you'll discover some of the most sophisticated transmedia platforms available. They are harnessing the power of all media. And I think one of the really interesting aspects, and I owe this to Malcolm Gladwell, an interesting article he wrote in New Yorker many years ago, where he looked at the evangelical movement. He said one of the interesting things that powers the evangelical movement and the narrative behind the movement is that while they have these mega churches where hundreds of thousands of people come to hear the sermon on Sunday, the real action is in meetings that occur outside the church 2 or 3 times a week with groups of maybe 6 people who form deep trust-based relationships with each other, and their whole focus is on action. It's not about studying the Word, it's about what can we do to have impact through the Word. And that's what's driving that movement. The transmedia and local initiative and action is critical. So I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm excited by the opportunity if we can get it right. I have this instinct, again, that narratives are hugely powerful. They're largely ignored. There's not a lot of attention that's been paid to them, at least in the sense that I'm talking about them. And I think they ultimately represent an extraordinarily powerful pull mechanism. As Eric mentioned in his introduction, I wrote a book called The Power of Pull. I think narratives are extremely powerful as a pull mechanism that draw out people and resources when needed and where needed, despite all the uncertainty that exists in the world. It can shape the world around us in ways that virtually nothing else can. And I think there are questions. Who's going to craft these broader social narratives? Again, I don't think it's any individual that can sit down and do this, certainly not through writing. It's up to all of us. Who even understands the need and power of a new set of social narratives? I think there's an underlying sense of malaise, certainly in the U.S. civic public, that the narratives we have today don't serve us well. But who's going to change that, and how? And what would the new social narrative look like? I think at the end of the day, one of the things that really excites me about this excuse me, is the opportunity to build a movement. Every powerful movement that I've ever seen in history that has had an impact on our world has been shaped and driven by a compelling and energizing narrative. So if you're serious about creating a movement and having impact through a movement, core questions: what's the narrative that's going to drive that movement? If we get this right, I think that small moves, smartly made, can set really big things in motion. So thank you very much for your attention. I think we have some time for some questions, and appreciate any input, feedback. I'm active on social media at J. Hagel for Twitter, and invite continuing conversation beyond whatever Q&A we have here today.